preparados para a sessão final deste encontro sobre o futuro do planeta. Todos os presentes sabem quem são os oradores que vão participar nesta última sessão. John Kerry e Sylvia Earle são duas pessoas extraordinárias e vêm partilhar connosco as suas reflexões, a sua experiência e o seu compromisso com o futuro do planeta. Acabei de entrevistar há 20 minutos o ex-secretário de Estado John Kerry e ouvi coisas surpreendentes. A sério. E julgo que vamos ter a oportunidade de as ouvir aqui, ditas para esta audiência e para quem nos acompanha através do streaming. Ouvi coisas como o mercado da economia sustentável, isto que temos estado aqui a falar, é o maior mercado da história. Esta observação altera por completo a maneira como muitos de nós olham, provavelmente, para as questões da sustentabilidade ambiental e para a defesa do planeta. Esta conversa, vai ser moderada pela Mariana van Zeller. É uma jornalista portuguesa e eu vou deixar as apresentações dos convidados para ela, mas não quero deixar de aproveitar esta oportunidade para dois ou três pensamentos. A Mariana é uma jornalista portuguesa que incorpora, ela própria, um testemunho de vida. Ela não sucumbiu às circunstâncias e desbravou caminhos novos que a levaram, sem planos, primeiro a estudar jornalismo nos Estados Unidos, depois, por circunstâncias fortuitas, mas que tinham a ver com essa sua determinação em estudar jornalismo, ela estava em Nova Iorque quando houve os atentados de 11 de setembro e essa foi a última vez que eu e ela interagimos, ela ao telefone, perante o maior atentado terrorista da história e eu no estúdio. A Mariana seguiu o seu caminho de uma forma notável. E porquê? E era isto que eu queria sublinhar. Ela decidiu fazer aquilo que é a essência do jornalismo, que é observar o que a rodeava e interrogar sobre o porquê das coisas. Porquê que as coisas são como são? E porquê que não são de outra maneira? A Mariana vive nos Estados Unidos, trabalha por todo o mundo, é verdade, trabalha por todo o mundo, exibe as suas reportagens em meios de difusão como a Kerry TV, que foi o projeto que foi fundado por Al Gore, o antigo vice-presidente dos Estados Unidos, ou a National Geographic, onde apresentou uma série apresentou muitas coisas, uma delas sobre economias paralelas em vários países do mundo, é um trabalho que ela tem perseguido desde há muito tempo, sobre o mercado negro, os mercados negros, e que lhe valeram mais um dos prémios mais importantes que existem no jornalismo internacional. A Mariana van Zeller vai moderar esta conversa, então, entre o antigo secretário de Estado John Kerry, o chefe da diplomacia norte-americana no segundo mandato de Barack Obama e que conduziu as negociações para o acordo nuclear com o Irão e também as negociações que permitiram o Acordo de Paris, em 2015, e Sylvia Earle, uma bióloga que vive no mar desde que atingiu a vida adulta e que encara como principal tarefa o despertar de consciências para a beleza do oceano e para os maus tratos que lhe infligimos. Na sua missão azul, ela identifica o que classifica como Hope Spots, locais de esperança nos oceanos. E há um em Portugal, no Mar dos Açores, a sul do Mar dos Açores, a sul dos Açores. A Sylvia Earle é uma referência mundial e o cognome que conquistou diz muito daquilo que é a sua vida. Por oposição à expressão tradicional e utilizada em várias línguas, de quando nos dirigimos a uma majestade, a um membro da realeza, dizemos Sua Alteza, e por acaso até inclinamos a cabeça ao dizermos Sua Alteza. O cognome da Sylvia Earle, pelos recordes de profundidade nos mergulhos que fez, pela quantidade de horas que passou dentro d'água, é Sua Profundeza. E isso ilustra-nos mas ao dizermos isto, também estamos a apontar a humildade com que a Sylvia Earle nos indica onde é que está o futuro do planeta. É este o debate que vai encerrar os trabalhos deste encontro.
Olá, bem-vindos a todos. Muito obrigada, Zé Alberto, por essa introdução. No entanto, não há melhor maneira de nos sentirmos underachievers, como dizem os americanos, do que partilhando um palco com os nossos próximos convidados aqui. Mas também é uma experiência super inspiradora, porque aqui estão duas pessoas que dedicaram e têm vivido uma vida de dedicação e de serviço pelo planeta. Eu vou fazer a introdução a cada um deles em inglês, porque não quero que eles achem que estamos a dizer mal deles em português. E eles vêm ao palco e depois cada um deles vai falar um pouco. Sylvia Earle has been called a living legend, a hero for the planet, and, as José Alberto just said, my personal favorite, her deepness, which is so appropriate. She is an oceanographer, a marine biologist, an explorer, and author and lecturer, and I've read that there's even a mini Lego figurine that is modeled after her, with little yellow flippers and everything. I really want to own one of those. She has logged more than 7,000 hours underwater across 100 expeditions, including leading the first team of women aquanauts and setting a record for solo diving to a depth of 1,000 meters. She was the first woman to serve as the chief scientist of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and since '98, she has been an explorer in residence at the National Geographic Society. She's my colleague. Please welcome to the stage my woman crush, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Welcome. You are so sweet. I have it. Mr. Kerry is known to, Mr. Secretary is known to have a lot of energy, which is why he came early on stage. John Kerry served as the U.S. Secretary of State from 2013 to 2017. As America's top diplomat, he actually made climate change one of his top priorities and played a key role in the success of the Paris climate agreements. From '85 to 2013, he served as U.S. Senator representing Massachusetts and was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee from 2009 to 2013. Now, Secretary Kerry is the best-selling author of several books, including his recently published memoir, Every Day is Extra, which I am reading, and I am loving it so, so much. And I have a copy backstage for you to sign. I'm so happy to have you both here, and I think we'll start with Dr. Earle, if you would like to make an introduction.
Is there a clicker up there?
Is there? Oh, we should think about that click.
I need to be able to...
Yes, change those photos. I will get one for you real quick.
What a pleasure it is to be here in this ocean-minded country and to be talking about the future of the ocean, the future of the world, the future of everything we care about. So, I'm starting on the land with my images. This is a tree I met earlier this year in Turkey. The tree began its life 500 years ago, the same time that Ferdinand Magellan launched his journey to circumnavigate the world at a time when world population was at about 500 million people. Consider what has happened in the last 500 years. For one thing, this image was taken by a then young astronaut, William Anders, as he was circumnavigating the moon and coming around from the other side and seeing us from afar. And this image, and others that followed, of looking at Earth from space, this one in particular, called Earthrise, had a transformative effect on people everywhere to realize in that vastness of space that is so beautiful, with all those sparkling stars and moons and whatever, there's no place like home. And the Earth from space, well, you can see it. It's blue. It's blue. It's the ocean. But it isn't just the rocks and water. It's life that makes this planet distinctive in the universe. I mean, there are other places that people aspire to go. We want to terraform our sister planet, Mars. But meanwhile, it looks as though we are Marsoforming Earth, making our beautiful blue planet more and more like the red one. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and less life. But now we know what we could not know, not just 50 years ago, not just 500 years ago, but any time in the past. We did not know what is now knowable, what is now known. That gives us an edge. It's really on my watch. I'm a witness to the most remarkable change in two great areas. One is, now we can see ourselves as never before, who we are, where we've come from, where we might be going. We have evidence that not only did not exist, but could not exist when I was a child. And the children of today, as doom and gloom is everywhere, you can say to them, as I do often, you have superpowers. All of you do. Because you know what was not knowable before. The smartest people who ever lived could not know what Earth looked like from space, or what was down at the deepest part of the ocean. Nobody knew when I was a child. But now it's there for all of us to see and understand that our relationship to the natural world, how our dependence on every breath we take, every drop of water we drink, how it anchors back to the blue part of the planet. And I've been privileged to be out there splashing around in the ocean, for decades now, getting to see the ocean from the inside out, living underwater on 10 different occasions, starting the first time in 1970, when it was unusual for women to be out there with scuba, even more so to be living underwater. My fellow divers at the time who were participants in living underwater were called aquanauts, because this is the same time when footprints were being put on the moon, 1969 and 70. And, but they called the team that I was involved with, I got to be the leader of the women's team, and we were called the Aquabelles, the Aqua Chicks, the Aqua Naughties. We didn't care what they called us, just so we could go and explore the ocean from the inside out, and to get the gift of time, being able to stay underwater. I mean, Jane Goodall spent 15 years, day and night, week after week, month after month, getting to know our fellow primates, the chimpanzees, and transform the way we not only look at them, but how we look at ourselves. The gift of time, short as it was, 2 weeks, that first time, and in subsequent thousands of hours of exploring the ocean, it's transformed certainly my way of looking at life in the sea, and the way I look at life on land, look at ourselves, look at us, who we are, and what we must now do to explore the ocean. The biggest discovery about the ocean, aside from the fact that it keeps us alive, generates most of the oxygen in the atmosphere, holds most of life on Earth, the greatest diversity and abundance of life, lives in the ocean, in the dark, below where light penetrates, because the average depth of the ocean is, after all, 4 kilometers down, maximum 11 kilometers. And isn't it odd that there were 12 people who went to the moon, and only on 3 occasions have people been And it's only 11 kilometers down. I mean, what are we thinking? Going up in the sky is wonderful. We must do this. But we need to also explore this part of the solar system, Earth, this part of the universe. This part of the universe is what keeps us alive. So we have technologies now that didn't exist when I was a child, that now others have available to not only get in the ocean, but to stay there, to be witnesses, to bring back information about what it's like to be submerged. I mean, fish do this all the time, but we see fish mostly on our plate or in the aquarium. Yay for the aquarium that enables us to go and meet with them and see them face to face, swimming with something other than lemon slices and butter. I was hoping to, take you down there. Oh, well, here you are. Here I was in the suit that took me down to deeper than I can go, breathing compressed air or even exotic mixes of gases. 400 meters is not that deep, but a chance to go and spend hours walking around on the ocean floor, the way people walk in space, but this inner space is really there for us to explore, and we must do this. The other great thing that we have learned about the ocean, the magnitude of our ignorance about the ocean. Only about 10% has been mapped with the same degree of accuracy that we have for the moon, for Mars, for Jupiter, and other places in our solar system. Little submarines. Why not? We have aircraft. I mean, how many people fly high in the sky? How many people have boats on the surface of the ocean or vehicles that travel over the land? How few have so far been able to go even 1,000 feet underwater? That's even, it's just a short distance in the greater scheme of things, but it's there on our watch to be able to explore and figure out what's going on down there. How does it relate to what we're doing up here on the surface, knowing that it does relate. Everything connects to what makes our existence possible. So, although I'm a scientist and I love to explore, just looking as a diver, I love to go in little submarines, and I've been involved with helping to build little submarines, and I hope going forward there will be many of these little craft that will take anyone who wishes to go into the sea and to be able to say what it's like, come back with experiences. It's there to be done. It's like the early days of aviation right now. And, when my father was a little boy, they were just beginning to take to the skies above. And now we're just at that early stage of being able to get the public at large to go deeper than where divers can go. This is a moment in time that is maybe the most exciting, exhilarating time ever when you think about the potential that we have armed with knowledge that could not exist before. One of the things we have learned is that it's not just about the ocean as rocks and water. The ocean is alive, and that's good news for us, that it's taken 4.5 billion years to shape the planet so that it's hospitable for us. In the early days of Earth, it was not. But thanks to those little green organisms that produce most of the oxygen in the atmosphere, capture much of the carbon, forests in the sea, that not only do the heavy lifting in terms of shaping the atmosphere and making life possible, they also generate food that feeds the animals that do not photosynthesize. That includes us, of course. Love to be green and just stand out in the sun and, wouldn't be quite as tasty, but at least I could have sustenance. Think about the diversity of life that is out there in the ocean. All the little creatures that feed on the tiny plants, the tiny organisms, bacteria that photosynthesize, providing sustenance for these small creatures that are consumed by larger creatures on up the food chain. It takes a lot of groceries to make a big fish or a whale or one of us. I love going out in the ocean and witnessing the food chains in action, and I try not to become a part of the food chain in action. But it makes me realize that in the ocean, nothing I am matters much to the fish, the other creatures who are there. I'm just, a piece of meat, and hope that they prefer what they normally eat. But being able to explore, to be able to see things that people have not been able to see before, what a gift to be around as a witness at this point in history. For 5 years, I had the pleasure of working with the National Geographic with a project called Sustainable Seas Expeditions. We had students from around the country, United States. We worked in the areas that had some protection as marine protected areas, marine sanctuaries. We had the CEOs of some companies. We had the president of the National Geographic. We had teachers get involved. We had students involved with this time of exploration to begin to see with new eyes what was right out there in our backyard. And now, on a project that is taking in the whole world, a concept called Mission Blue, with hope spots, places that are not necessarily protected, but engaging champions, engaging communities around the world to identify places that they know and love and care about, sometimes that are really in good shape, like the Pristine Seas expeditions that National Geographic has been fostering over the past 5 years or so, but some places that are in not so good condition, like San Francisco Bay, is a hope spot because there are champions there dedicated to making it better than it otherwise would be, to gather data, to share stories. We're working with IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and with the organization called ESRI, with GIS technologies, to be able to characterize each of what now has grown in 10 years to be a network of 132 places around the world, and this year, adding to that area, the Azores. I'm so pleased to announce that that is now one of the newest hope spots in this group of this growing network of hope. So, one of the things that we can do is to share the view, share the knowledge that we have, and to look at the facts, look at the status, look at what's happening to the planet that we could not know, could not measure, did not have the evidence when I was a child. But now we know that humans are really altering the nature of nature in ways that do not favor not only polar bears, not good news for us either. We have the power to know what we know and then use that knowledge to get to a better place. That is our gift. Polar bears cannot know why the ice is melting. They know that they're in trouble, but they cannot know why. I mean, even if they knew why, what could a polar bear do to change the way things are now functioning around the world? Bad news for coral reefs. It isn't just the polar areas. If you really want to alter the nature of nature, there are three things that you would undertake if you were a wicked alien trying to, change the world in ways that do not favor life on Earth as it is. You would change the temperature, you would change the chemistry, and you'd do your best to get rid of life. You'd clear cut the forests, you'd knock off the coral reefs, you'd kill as many fish and whales and other creatures as you could, and eventually it would percolate down and affect all life, including the humans. Even without trying, even without knowing, we have changed the temperature. We are changing the chemistry. We are diminishing the fabric of life through our actions, thinking, as I thought, everyone thought half a century ago, that the world is too big to fail. We can take as much as we want out of the natural systems, and things will just keep on going the way they always have, except now we know. We have evidence. What we're putting into the ocean, excess carbon dioxide, turns into carbonic acid, altering the chemistry of the ocean. It's more acidic. Putting all this plastic in the ocean that did not exist when I was a child. Plastics were just beginning to come into existence. And now we can see, again, that what seemed like such a good idea at the time, maybe we need to rethink how we use the world around us. Single-use anything doesn't make a lot of sense. If we really understand the consequences, there is no way, and there's only so much planet to go around. Again, when I think back in the time of Magellan, only 500 million people on the whole planet, and when I came along, 2 billion people. Now we're looking at 8 billion people, almost there. So, what are we going to do about it, armed with knowledge? That's the challenge of what we're talking about here at this conference. What's the future that we want? That was the headline at the Rio Plus 20 conference back in 2012. And you can look at almost anywhere, but let's take a look at sharks. When I started splashing around in the ocean, people said, be really careful because there are man-eaters out there. And then I realized, I don't have to worry. I don't qualify for a man-eating shark. Half the population gets away without being worried about man-eating sharks. But now we have to worry about man-eating sharks. We have killed so many of them, creatures whose history goes back at least 400 million years. And not all the same sharks are here that were around in the 100 million years ago, 50 million years ago. But there was a time when sharks were really abundant. Now, their populations globally have crashed. On the order of 90% of at least the big ones are gone. We have developed an attitude. It's been marketed to eat sharks. And we've done a really good job, either intentionally or sometimes incidentally, taking these animals, in the process taking other forms of wildlife from the sea. Bluefin tuna, in this part of the world, revered in restaurants, on your plate, served in so many wonderful ways. But again, the populations have gone like this in a very short time. When I served as the chief scientist of NOAA, I was stunned by information that 90% of the bluefin tuna in the North Atlantic had been taken between 1970 and 1990, 20 years of being so good at catching these amazing creatures that we had been able to diminish them based on the fishermen's own records. That if we wanted to, we could kill them all, eat them all. Well, I hope that that doesn't happen. Whether you like your bluefin tuna on your plate, or whether you love them out there swimming in the ocean as a part of what keeps the ocean healthy, we have to be mindful of what it takes to have these creatures at all, because we do have the capacity to exterminate them. We've done it on the land with creature after creature after creature, and we've done it in the ocean with others as well. You still have monk seals, as I understand it, in Madeira, as well as in a few places in the Mediterranean Sea. We used to have monk seals, a different species, but only one of 3 that existed until when I was in high school. In 1952, the last of the monk seals in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, the last one was seen. We know how to kill. We're really good at taking on an extravagant scale wildlife from the ocean. And we thought it did not matter, that there would always be more. But like melting ice in the polar areas, we now have evidence that we are really too good at taking and not good enough at understanding the limits and giving the fish, giving the turtles, giving whales, giving life in the ocean a break, and understand what it takes to keep them alive as well as we know how to kill them. So, whales, good news. There are more whales today than when I was a child because we did stop killing them for the most part. Some nations still take them for reasons that are commercial, short-term, but other nations are beginning to understand the real value, the living value of creatures such as sperm whales. In the Azores, it wasn't so long ago that sperm whales were valued for pounds of meat, barrels of oil, and around the world, the same story, but there's been a transition in my lifetime, your lifetime, of people valuing wildlife in the ocean for reasons that transcend just products, commodities, even food. We have lots of choices about what to eat, but we're beginning to understand that there are limits to what we can take from the ocean, and most of what we take is a matter of choice. For some, it's a real need. So, I love my recent visit to the Azores, where whale watching has become an economic boon. Among other things, you don't have to kill the whales to make money from whales. You can go out and crazy people such as I will pay big bucks to be able to go for the pleasure of being breathed on by a whale. In Palau, the little island country out in the Pacific, the president of the country, Tommy Ramingasau, has done an economic study of sharks and says every shark is worth more than $1 million alive because of, again, people such as I will pay to go and expose myself to the sharks, to be able to see them in their own realm. And a dead shark is worth a few $100s as compared to a live one that really can keep on earning money. So bird watching is a big deal around the world since the beginning of the 20th century. Now, beginning in the 21st century, we're beginning to see people who really love to just go look at the fish, of course, in the aquarium. But that is like a halfway house for fish and people. We can get out in the ocean and get to see creatures that previously have just been looked upon either as of no value or have value on our plates or for products of various sorts. But when I first lived underwater, I had this transformative experience of getting to know fish and the fact that they have faces, that every fish is different from every other one, like all of you, like every cat, like every dog, like every whale, every fish can be distinguished not just by the DNA that each and every fish has that sets it apart from every other one that has ever been. They have faces. Every whale shark has a distinctive pattern of spots. You can take a picture and send it into the big whale shark computer central database and find out where has that shark been. Has he ever been cataloged before? You know, it's just a new era of understanding that we all share about the value of life in the sea for more than products and more than food. They're part of the chemistry of the ocean, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle. Every whale, every fish, every little copepod, every human, we all do the same thing. We eat and we put nutrients back into the system. Another way to say it is fish poop. And they put nutrients back that drives the phytoplankton, that captures the carbon, generates the oxygen, shapes the way the world works. So, it's been my privilege to not only have a chance to go meet with a fish, to sometimes meet with the fishermen. And President George W. Bush was a fisherman of some renown. And I had this moment where we had a chance to talk, and I said, Mr. President, you know, if there are to be fishermen, you have to have fish. That was my big duh moment. But to have fish, you have to give them a break. They have to have, like birds. If you want to have birds, You have to protect feeding areas and breeding areas and the corridors over which they travel. And we kind of got that with wild birds. We have international policies and programs to protect wild birds, songbirds, eagles, owls. We're just beginning to do the same thing for the ocean. George W. Bush did something sort of uncharacteristic for him, it seems, in his administration, by establishing what at the time was the biggest marine protected area on the planet, the Papahanaumokuakea Marine Reserve, building on actions that previous presidents had undertaken. And then along comes Barack Obama and established, quadrupled the size of that area to provide a safe haven out there in the Pacific Ocean, where even the fish are safe. But there's more. Out there in the reserve on Midway Island, I met this bird. This bird has been named by humans as Wisdom. She is a Laysan albatross. She began flying at about the same time that I began diving in the 1950s. She has been a witness to this same era of remarkable change that I have, that you have. But for all of her intelligence, and she comes back to the same nesting area, having traveled thousands of miles, finds her way back home. She and her lifetime mate, they have one chick a year. If they're lucky, it's one chick a year. She must have seen that there are fewer squid and a lot more of this stuff that we call plastic out in the ocean. Again, like the polar bear, she doesn't know why, or if she did, she would not know what to do about it. But here's the thing. You know, I know, the world knows as never before. We have some real problems. But the best news of all is we know what to do about it. The real key is doing it. Doing it. It's the will to take what we know and really take it seriously, take it to heart, so that we can have, in the next 50 years, or 500, or 5,000, the world that we want. Thank you. Over to you.
Mr. Secretary, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
You now all understand why Dr. Earle is my woman crush?
I beg your pardon? Were you telling me it's time to sit down before I got up? No. Well, thank you. Thanks, Mariana, for your generous introduction, and more importantly, thank you to all of you for being assembled here. And thank you, Sylvia Earle, Dr. Earle, for just years of incredible commitment and passion for this, and we're all in your debt. It's a great privilege for me to be back in this beautiful country. I came here as secretary. It's good to hear an accent and a language spoken that is very personal to me. My wife, Teresa, couldn't be here, but she grew up in Mozambique when it was still a Portuguese colony. And she was the daughter of a doctor, and her native language is Portuguese. So it's one of the 5 that she speaks. The second language she learned was English, and then she became an American citizen. But I hear about Portugal and Portuguese and history all the time, folks. And she gave up on trying to teach me the accent. She accuses me of trying to butcher it into Italian. But she shared with me the gift of culture, a literature, and a warmth that is uniquely Portuguese. We are we are all very grateful to Soares dos Santos, see, I can get something correct, family, and to the Francisco Manuel dos Santos Foundation for a philanthropic passion that is critical to all of us. If people don't care the way they care, we're in trouble, because too many governments are unwilling to put up the funding, unwilling to do the research, unwilling to do the enforcement, and we rely, regrettably, on philanthropy more than we should to do what is right. Just reading and hearing about the Oceano Azul Foundation, some words jumped off the page and hit me as I was reading about it, most notably, blue generation. We are all here, and I'm looking out at the audience, a lot of young folks are here. There is a youth awakening spurred by Climate Strike and Sunrise Movement and Extinction Rebellion and others who are getting the sense of urgency more, unfortunately, than so-called leaders. But we're here spanning ages and backgrounds and nationalities because we need to navigate not just a roadmap to increase the value of marine economy and the GDP, but we've got to be a blue generation in the largest sense of the word as we carve a path to protect the oceans. And you heard a lot about the beauty of it and the mystery of it, but also the contribution of it in the moments, in the time that Sylvia was talking. And as you look around this room, from Sylvia Earle to José Soares dos Santos, it underscores the stewardship of the ocean is not just a personal passion or a pet project of any single activist or philanthropic endeavor. It is genuinely a shared responsibility. It affects a $500 billion global economy. It affects the livelihood of 12% of the world's population. So it is very appropriate to have this conversation here in Lisbon, not just because you can't imagine the Portugal of Fernando Pessoa without the Azores or without the Algarve, but because Lisbon looks no further than its historic reflection in the water itself, I think, to understand the shared stakes of the ocean in crisis today. I was reminded flying in here of the fact that you actually journey over a massive amount of Portuguese territory before you ever spot a landing spot. A stunning 97% of all the territory belonging to this beautiful country is ocean and seafloor. Just 3% is dry land. And that is territory that is marked, on the one hand, by the very rich marine biodiversity that Sylvia talked about, the deep water, the coral reefs, and on the other, regrettably, by rising greenhouse gas emissions, which threaten to transform the Atlantic and beyond into a vast wasteland that would be unrecognizable to the unspoiled waters that the iconic Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama set sail on. You have a connection to this that is primal, and you can be influential and critical to the attitudes and feelings of people all in the world. You know the stakes viscerally, because for Portugal, these waters are an inseparable part of your national identity. Now, of course, the challenge is not just to talk about the environment. It's about a range of policy choices that are fundamental for more than 1 billion people worldwide who depend on fish as their primary source of protein. It's about the next generation being able to count on the oceans and do so in a way that is more powerful than the way our generation, to some degree, took it for granted. I'm proud to say I know Sylvia didn't. I know I didn't. From the time I was 3 years old and dipped my toes into the mud of Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound and Massachusetts and Cape Cod, I've been in love with it. But we're here together quite simply because we are in the fight, and it is literally the fight of our lives. And if it isn't, something's wrong with you. We're here as part of a movement that has grown since the first Our Oceans Conference, which I was privileged to create, host, and help to bring together, where we brought nations for the first time. Think about this. It's absurd to me. I tried to do it as a senator, and I could never get the critical mass. But when I became Secretary of State, I found it was really easy to pick up the phone and say, here's what we're doing. And we did it. And the result was we brought people from all over the world. We literally raised $10 billion. We put aside 3.8 million square miles of newly protected ocean, which Sylvia referred to a few months ago about what the Obama administration did to stretch anything we've done before. And now we all have our eyes on Norway, which next month will host the next Our Oceans gathering. We've had one in the U.S., one in Chile, one again in the U.S. just before I left. Then we had it in Malta. We had it in Indonesia, in Bali, and this year in Norway, and next year in Palau. It's become an institutional thing. But folks, I'm here to tell you something. We got to remind ourselves that these gatherings cannot be an excuse to just talk. We have to be galvanizing each other in order to agree on the specific things that we can and will do in order to lift the effort and force the system to respond. Why is it so critical to make sure that we kick ourselves into a higher gear? Well, very simply, the sad truth is we are not winning. Not one country is doing what it pledged to do in Paris, let alone what we need to do. We are not getting the job done. And that's why a bunch of kids in school are walking out of school and saying, shaking us, in essence, to wake up and to recognize what our responsibility is. They can't do it. We can, but we're not yet. And it's not because some people aren't trying. A bunch of us. I was in Rio in 1992 with Al Gore and Tim Moore, a whole bunch of us in the Senate. We were down there fighting to do it. I've been to Copenhagen. I've been to Kyoto. Poland. You run the list. And I'm mad. You can sense it. I'm tired of this phoniness by which the merchants of doubt strike again to come back and actually buy phony oil-driven studies that aren't studies at all, that tell us, oh, gee whiz, as my president said, or I should say the President of the United States said, that climate change is just a Chinese hoax. That's a quote. So the sad truth is we're not winning, and we're definitely not winning when not all over the globe you still see too much money chasing too few fish. Not when on the high seas, which is still most of the ocean, there is still too little enforcement. We began to bring the Navy, the Coast Guard, the various armed forces together to talk about how we can enforce in the high seas. Nothing's happening today in terms of expanding that effort. You can't say that we're doing it when you have the details that Ian Urbina, a New York Times reporter, put out in something called The Outlaw Ocean. And we're now working on putting together a series, we hope, which will show on television what is happening on the high seas. But the high seas are the wild west of human trafficking, piracy, transfer of weapons, narcotics, illegal fishing. You can't say we're winning when still more than 400 unresolved maritime boundary disputes are leaving behind ungoverned ocean spaces. And you can't say we're winning when some people are still strip mining the oceans. In the 1990s, Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska and I took the issue of drift net fishing to the UN, and we got a ban out of the UN. But there's still renegade pirates out there on ships that are using drift nets because they strip mine the ocean. And then they throw away fully 50% to two-thirds of the catch. It's called bycatch. You can't say we're winning when the coral reefs are dying and when nearly 60% of global fish stocks are fished at their maximum levels now, and 33% are overfished and in need of recovery. Back in the 1980s, I think it was, in Massachusetts, we lost our fishery for cod completely anyway. But we lost our fishery for striped bass, which everybody loves to fish. We had to shut down the fishery for 10 years. It worked. We brought back the striped bass fishery, and now we have limits. They're enforced strictly, how many inches you fish, otherwise you catch and release. But my friends, for a country like Portugal, for most of the Mediterranean countries, for countries all around the world with coastlines, there is no blue economy. There's no fishing industry if we don't protect our oceans. And we can't protect our oceans if we can't show people everywhere that done right, protecting the oceans does not kill jobs, it is jobs. And second, you can't solve the problem of the oceans. You can't solve the problem of climate change without solving the problem of the oceans, and you can't solve the problem of the oceans without solving the problem of climate change. They go absolutely hand in hand. Now, you don't have to be a scientist or a leader to understand that the reason a lot of people are alarmed, the reason a lot of you are sitting here today, is that climate change itself is changing the basic chemistry of the ocean. It's changing it faster than it has been changed in the last 50 million years. It's threatening marine life, as you heard from Sylvia, that may simply die out because it can no longer survive in the very waters that have nourished us since time began. There are now more than 500 dead zones in the world's oceans. Dead zones, all created by the choices of our fellow human beings, all of them places where nothing lives because there's no oxygen. It's been sucked out by the overflow of nitrates from, in our case, in the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, the Ohio River, all the farms, the pesticides, the stuff flows off, goes out the Mississippi River and spreads out the delta, and nothing lives. Life does not exist. The damage has now been reached such an extreme level that unless we change our practices by the middle of this century, there will be more plastic in the water than fish. You cut open a whale today that's dead and died and beached, and more of them are doing that because orientation, something's off. You cut it open, you find 60 pounds of plastic inside that whale. You find it in birds that die. You find it in turtles that die. You get tangled in it. So, by the way, you also have to focus on the fact that 51% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. So this isn't just about fish and turtles. This is about us. And people need to start to, once again, as I learned in high school, it is important to have a president of a country and leaders who actually understand and believe in science. Pretty basic. And so So let me tell you, having been privileged to lead the negotiating team in Paris and having worked on this for all those years, I went to China 6 weeks into being secretary. I negotiated with President Xi, and we got the Chinese finally to stop joining with the G77, the 77 less developed countries, and blocking everything from happening because they didn't want to be part of it. They thought, and not inconsequentially, or even correctly, that the developed world ought to be doing this. They're the ones who created it. 20 countries make up about 85-90% of all the emissions. 3 countries make up more than 50%, or 3 blocks. China, 25%, US, 15%, and EU, the other, 14% or so. That's more than 50% right there, folks. Don't you think we could do something? So that Tommy Ramengansau, our friend down in Palau, has given up on talking about mitigation and adaptation, which 20 years ago were just options. Today, they're mandatory, but he's not stuck with those 2 options. He's looking for a place to move his people because his nation state in the Pacific is going to disappear. True for the Marshall Islands, true for Kiribati. And by the way, people in the southern part of Florida and Bangladesh better start thinking about this too. So my friends, when we went to Paris, we knew that we couldn't get an agreement that was mandatory because a lot of countries didn't want to sign up to something mandatory, ours included, because we had a United States Senate that was not prepared to ratify it. So we have to do something called common but differentiated contribution. Common responsibility to do something, differentiated in what we would do. Every nation basically designed its own program, which is fine. It was great. And when here's what we were betting on. We knew in Paris we were not leaving having guaranteed to the world that we were going to hold the Earth's temperature to 1.5 degrees temperature increase or even 2 degrees. We knew that. But we weren't faking it. What we said was, because of the constraints politically, we were sending a signal to the marketplace of the world. A signal that 196 countries take the issue seriously, 196 countries are going to work to change, 196 countries are going to try to do their best to reduce emissions. Guess what? Marketplace, open for business. Biggest market the world has ever seen. 4.5 billion users today of energy. Why do I say of energy? Because energy is the solution to climate change. It's going to be 9 billion users in the next 30 years if you think we have problems today. So my friends, in Paris, we said we're going to start this effort to have the money, the allocation of capital begin to move to alternative, renewable, and sustainable energy. And it did. For the first year after Paris, $358 billion was invested in sustainable energy, renewable energy. More money for the first time in human history than fossil fuel. It worked. The next year, the same. But then we started to see a change. President Trump came in, you had other leaders in various parts of the world, you had reluctant participants in Paris too, people we kind of have to drag to the table. And so last year, folks, emissions went up in Europe, up in the United States, up around the world. This year, they're up. If you don't think this isn't serious, 3 decades ago, we had the hottest decade in human history, just until the next decade. Then we had the second hottest decade in human history, until the last decade, our decade now, hottest decade in human history. Last July, hottest July in human history. One day in July, hottest day in human history. Don't you think someone at the level of a presidency of a country or a finance minister ought to get the message from that? I mean, this is absurd. This is why kids are striking at school. And it's actually reflective of what's wrong with politics everywhere, if you want to know the truth. Governance is not doing very well. Everything is moving faster in the world today. Ideas move faster. Push a button, goes around the world. Lies can move faster, too, pushing that same button, and they do. But you've got goods moving faster, and between more places. People moving faster. Everything's moving fast. Technology changing faster. AI coming at us. You run the gamut. One thing's not moving faster. Governance. Almost anywhere. And so let me just say to you that there's actually in all of this, I am an optimist, believe it or not. Why am I an optimist? Because every one of the challenges that we face on this planet, with the exception of a tsunami or an earthquake or a sunspot or major storm, although those we're now contributing to, is human created. Human created. That's the downside. The upside is they're human created. Therefore, we can change them if we make choices. And I'll tell you what's missing. I know this because I've been part of this for a long time. When I came back from the war in Vietnam, the first thing I did before I protested the war was become involved in a thing called Earth Day. And we brought 20 million Americans out of their homes. And we marched and we told people don't want to live next to a toxic waste site. People don't want to live next to a dump that gives them cancer. Run the list, and that's true of people everywhere. So those 20 million people translated into a political movement. And we targeted the 12 worst votes in the United States Congress, and we defeated 7 of the 12. You know what happened? Sylvia was, you know what happened? We passed the Clean Air Act right away. We passed the Safe Drinking Water, Marine Mammal Protection, Coastal Zone Management. We created the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States of America. We didn't even have one till this in 1972 because it was a voting issue. My friends, That's what we have to do now. For the oceans, for climate, which is both the same, we have to all around the world decide we are going to hold the politicians accountable. We're going to move a mass movement of people who have the right to vote, and we're going to vote for the future and take back the future in the doing of that. That is, believe it or not, I racked my head. I said, okay, what are we going to do? Well, I don't want to just knock on doors and ask people to do something. I want to get the people who want to do the something, who are going to lead us to get done what we know we can do. And I am convinced that if we put the money that we allocated into the mission innovation in Paris, if we put the money into the Green Climate Fund that we allocated in Paris, we created a $100 billion fund we all committed to donate. You know how much money is in the Green Climate Fund? Less than $5 billion. How can you say to anybody that we're serious? We're not serious yet. We have to transition out of the internal combustion engine. We can do it in a rational way. We have to bring the auto dealers to the table with the utility with the people who do the public works departments. We have to get together and figure out how quickly can we build the infrastructure. How fast can we join a consortium to look for negative emissions technology, which literally sucks the bad stuff out of the air and puts it somewhere, and we begin to work to eliminate. That's why I'm an optimist, because we've made a lot of changes on this great planet in the last years. We're on the brink of having the first generation of children born AIDS-free in Africa. We did that with PEPFAR. We stopped Ebola in West Africa 2 years ago when people said 1 million people are going to die in the next 4 months, and we sent our forces over there to build healthcare delivery capacity, and we did difference. If you're a woman in the world today, you're pregnant, you're 50% more likely to live through childbirth. Your child's 50% more likely to live, more likely to give birth, to go to school and be fed. The standard of living is higher and longer than ever before in human history. In most places, 400 million people, 450 million have come out of poverty into middle class in China, 400 in India. The issue is we can do these things. The issue is will we make the wise decisions to protect the ocean, protect the planet, and to protect our future that people are demanding. And by the way, if we do that, there are tens of millions of jobs to be created. There is no question it is not a loser for the economy, it's a winner. When you put those billions of people buying energy, buying food, buying transport, but it's done in a way that respects something critical called an ecosystem. So I leave you just with this thought. There's a fellow in the 1700s when this pioneering map maker named Richard Hallett, he set out to map the oceans and to write the globe's first commercial atlases for navigation. He had never been to sea. He didn't have the information or the money or the first-hand knowledge that we have today. He didn't even know if it could be done. He went to the portside bars of England and he bought sailors' rum, heard their stories, and then he went home each night and tried to connect their stories of far-off geographies and trade routes and put it on the paper in the form of maps. He didn't have satellite imaging. He didn't have Google. Didn't have Skype. Didn't have the ability to talk face-to-face with the fishermen 10,000 miles away without leaving a cubicle. He didn't have billions of dollars in collective resources from research universities and governments and businesses determined to preserve their way of life. But do you know what? He did it. And if he could map the oceans with so little information, surely we could save the oceans with a level of information and insight and investment that Hallett couldn't dare dream existed, which people like Sylvia and others have put together and which we know is there. Resolving this challenge of climate change, my friends, is the challenge of our time. Not just our generation, but every generation. And I believe that we can write the positive story that I just described. There are countries making a difference now in fishing and fishing rules and fishing practices. So there's no question we can get there. And that's what this is all about. Future generations, responsibility. We each have a job to do, and I hope we're going to go out and get it done. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I would like to start with trying to have your stark or hidden optimism about the world translated into sort of some action from the consumers and the people and the Portuguese here that are listening in this case. There was one, and in particular in terms of the ocean, in particular in terms of fish, there was one statistic that came in the panel before us that I didn't know and that blew me away, and I think blew away a lot of the people here as well, which was this idea that 90% of the big fish in the oceans have been decimated. We only have 10%. So I think the first question would be, if we start concentrating on fish, what can we do to save the 10% that we have left?
I'd be glad to jump in, dive in, and then turn it back over to you. But one thing you can do is think like a fish. What do fish really need? I have asked fishermen that very question, and I've gotten some very straight answers. You have to protect the places that they make more fish. You can't, to really protect fish, don't go taking them when they're doing what they can to make more fish. And yet, perversely, there has been a habit that has grown in the last 50 years to go to those breeding areas where the fish are all together. There was a time when it didn't make sense to take too many fish because you couldn't handle too many. Now we have refrigeration, we have jets taking fish from one side of the ocean to the other for marketplace. Not alive, but, ready to eat. So understand that, first of all. Understand further that this is not just about fish as food or fish as commodities. We used to think of birds as primarily food or commodities. And we kind of got over that during the 20th century. We aren't totally over it. We eat a lot of chicken, Kentucky Fried, or whatever. But the wild birds we tend to respect for other reasons, and it isn't just aesthetic. They have a place in the greater scheme of things that keeps us alive. You have to understand that fish and other wildlife in the ocean, that includes the shrimp, the lobsters, the octopus, the squids, the whole gamut of life, they're all part of what makes the ocean a healthy place, keeps the planet healthy. Every fish is a carbon-based unit, like every tree. We're clear-cutting these carbon-based units that we call fish out of the ocean on a level that we can look at it. Look at the numbers. Here's where the fish were, and the shrimp and the lobsters and many other squid. Here's where they are now, and it's happened on my watch. It's hard to justify that as sustainable extraction of wildlife from the sea as a reality when, look at the numbers. Here's where they were, here's where they are, and they keep going down. We've got to think like a fish, think like an ocean. What is the real value of these living parts of the big engine that keeps us alive? And of course, people will continue to take wildlife from the ocean as a source of food, but to realize that much that is now extracted is a choice. It's not a real need. There are some who really do rely on the ocean as a source of sustenance. But the real problems are coming from the large-scale industrial extraction that is only a phenomenon in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. I've watched it happen, so have you. It's a matter of decades that we're stripping the ocean of life on a scale that is unprecedented. Just look at the evidence and then, okay, we have to think differently. That's number one, is think differently about the value of what lives in the ocean. That an octopus has a place in the ocean may have a place on your plate, but once you get to know an octopus, it's really hard to think of putting them on your plate. Because, they're just part of the world in a different way. And we've come a long way with other forms of wildlife, but we haven't yet quite absorbed the importance of life in the ocean with the same degree of respect and dignity that we accord to other forms of wildlife. We're kind of getting there. All those millions of divers out there seeing the ocean with new eyes, and the scientists who are evaluating the carbon value of a fish alive in the ocean, the nitrate cycle, the oxygen, all those things that maintain the planet with these creatures as part of the recipe for what keeps us alive. I mean, it's another big duh. Now we know. And we need to protect big areas of the ocean where we just let the ocean be the ocean.
Well, you may have to...
Oh, excuse me, one more thing.
I think...
Just one more thing. Hoorah for the Azores, the news that the president has just kind of made a commitment that 15% of the entire exclusive economic zone around the Azores, your country, will be safe havens for fish and other wildlife there. I mean, what a gift, not just to the creatures in the sea, it's a gift not just to Portugal, it's a gift to the world. I want to thank you and acknowledge that wonderful news.
So let me be very, very blunt. If you don't enforce, nothing's going to happen, period. You have to enforce. All these declarations of marine protected areas, and we've done it too. I mean, I got the largest marine protected area in the world done with Putin, believe it or not, the Ross Sea, Antarctica. But if we don't enforce, those renegade pirate ships are going to be down there, my friends. I was down in South Africa, I saw reams of ships, I won't name the countries, all in dry dock. They don't even go home. There's fish there, and then a big 747 picks them up at the airport, flies them back to countries that love, tuna. Well, I mean, blue tuna is going to go away. We're going to lose it. 400 million Chinese have now discovered sushi. You think that's going to survive? Money, money, money. Too much money chasing too few fish. And you see what happens with narcotics? You see what happens with high-end luxury goods? You see what happens. And unless you prosecute, unless you have a set of rules, in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, we negotiated with the Soviet Union to rein in nuclear weapons. We've negotiated on Iran. That's what you do. That's not happening. There's no effort, protocol whatsoever to try to guarantee that the high seas are enforced. And if you don't enforce each and every one of these protected areas, it's Katie bar the door, period.
I think the high seas represent the last best chance we have on our watch to really shift from this to a time of recovery. There are a lot of things we can do, but when you think it's almost half of the world, it's not just the biggest part of the ocean, but we've got to come together to make that happen. It's partly what we buy, what we eat, but it's also using our power.
By the way, you have these big factory ships that sit out in the high seas, and they send out their small boats that cross over into people's economic zones, fish illegally in the economic zone, bring it back to the factory ship, and then it gets shipped out. We now have a thing called the port state measures, which we fought very hard to get ratified, where fish are brought in to a port, and we have declarations of where they were caught, and we trace people. We have what's called the ACES system, which tracks ships at sea. The problem is it'll tell you which ship it is, where it is, what direction it's going in, what course it's on, what speed it's on, et cetera, and you can follow them by satellite. There's no excuse for this problem today. It is simply the lack of creative willpower to go out and get it done, because we have the technology, we have the digitalization, we have the satellites, and one of the problems today is you can turn off your ACES. So they turn them off at key moments and go make a dash in, do their fishing, come out. But we could enforce if we had the willpower to come together globally to make something happen. And I regret that we're just not even having that kind of discussion right now.
So, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned before how you can't talk about the climate or climate change without talking about the oceans and vice versa. But yet, the oceans, I think, were only mentioned once, is that correct, in the Paris Agreement? And they weren't really a part of the ocean. And I know you fought very hard for the Paris Agreement, and you were a key player in it, and it was very successful in the fact that there was an agreement and there were signatory countries. But why weren't the oceans included, do you think?
Well, we, very bluntly, because we had too many countries that had difficulty handling more than one topic at the same time. And so we stuck where we knew we could get success because we needed that success. And we knew that's one of the reasons why I started the Oceans. The very next year, we did the Oceans Conference in Washington called Our Oceans and raised the money and begun the process. But it's always been, it's been an afterthought. I mean, there's an inherent human instinct about the oceans. You stand on the shore of a beach in the sea and you see it rolling and endlessly horizon, and you look at the map and you see it out there, and it's hard to fathom that teeny little us, you know, individually can go out and hurt it. And for too long, it's been our dumping ground. We think it's going to somehow consume all of our trash and consume all of our detritus and so forth. And there just is an overload moment. Scientists have discovered that, we know that most of the heat of global warming is consumed by the ocean. Ocean is what we call the biggest sink, which is a consumer of carbon dioxide. But we've now had occasions where the ocean has regurgitated carbon dioxide, been measured in Antarctica or elsewhere. And we don't know what the saturation point is. And Sylvia can't tell me. We don't know. So we're just recklessly keep on filling it up, folks. And the danger in a place like Antarctica, you now have warm water spilling over the continental shelf, going under the ice and destabilizing the ice, which is speeding up warming and creating a West Antarctic ice sheet threat that it just slides down and goes into the ocean. Greenland, the same threat today. Greenland is melting 4 times faster than it was 10 years ago. I went up there and stood on the glacier and looked down a hole with this torrential, raging river underneath the ice going down out in the water. I watched 86 million metric tons of ice break off, a good portion of it, because it does that every day in the Koenigsgaard Fjord, and then floats out to sea to melt. 86 million metric tons, folks, so you put it into a place to comprehend it, is enough water every single day for greater New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey for an entire year, each day. That's what's happening. And so, we've really, we've got the ability to be able to change it, but people don't understand completely, and that's why we need to be doing a lot more, understanding facts. The problem with facts today is that in the new world of the internet, we have no baseline for truth. And I had a colleague in the United States Senate called Daniel Patrick Moynihan, very well known for professor and UN ambassador and so forth. And he had a terrific phrase. He said, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. We're living in a world in which people think they are, or they make them up. And how do you run a democracy? How do you make decisions and build consensus when you can't establish what the baseline of truth is? Right. It's really hard.
Mm-hmm. Do you both think there should be a Paris Agreement for the oceans?
There should be what?
That there should be a Paris Agreement for the oceans, because it is right now an afterthought.
Absolutely. No question about it. We need several new agreements. We need a new nuclear agreement, because our president and Russia are rushing towards a new arms race. We have nowhere scratched the surface of what we ought to be doing to get at cyber, because cyber is equally, if not more dangerous. I find cyber a greater threat than nuclear weapon right now, because I think the chances of the nuclear weapon, we've sort of put it in a box. It's dangerous, but it's not as dangerous. Cyber is not in any box. And 15 to 20 people, properly funded, could go off to some barn in a, distant country or somewhere, and properly funded, those people could bring an entire great nation to its knees by pushing buttons. The entire finance system of the world could be totally confused. You don't perhaps know it every day, but billions of dollars gets transferred illegally from banks. It's kind of quiet. But you've seen what's happened with data and information. We don't have a sufficient control on the capacity of hackers to wreak havoc in shutting down a biosystem or an airport or radar system or other things. And we really need to be facing that reality. So I'd put cyber ahead of nuclear, and then of course the oceans and climate go hand in hand. We've got to enforce. But we can do it. I mean, God bless, we can do this. It's there to be done. But I don't hear a lot of leaders, maybe you do, I don't hear a lot of people saying this is the urgency or this is what we have to do. That's why kids are striking in schools right now. That's why people don't have faith in government. That's why they're trying right extreme and left extreme and maybe even center extreme. Because there is total dissatisfaction globally by a lot of people who don't feel that globalization has done much for them, and they look at the world and they're pretty angry about their lot in life. That's bad breeding ground for things we've lived through previously.
We need leaders who are moving the world in the right direction, but we don't have to wait to make a difference. Just as a handful of bad guys can cause big trouble, a handful of good guys, that's non-gender guys, can really turn things in a positive way.
Totally.
And that too is happening. But every one of us, I think about the superpowers we have because we know what could not be known before. We know the problems are pretty easy to identify, and we can point fingers at everybody else who should be doing this or that, but we should also be looking in the mirror, because every choice we make about what to eat, what to wear, the power we use, the water we waste or not, I mean, all that times 8 billion really stacks up if we just start...
The choices are critical. I mean,
moving in the right direction, starting with you.
I just had a new house, and I'm privileged to have been able to do it, but a lot of people are doing it because we have a tax incentive to make it a very good deduction to encourage you to do it, and that is put in a solar field right in my backyard to deal with the house, and what's surplus will go to the grid. That's a decision. I have decided I will not have any internal combustion car. My next car, finish my lease now, get rid of it, and go pure electric from here on out. And the automobile people are coming on. You know, Audi's got one. Other people have it. Those are individual choices. You get enough people making the individual choices, you affect the market.
It's a wave.
Change.
Right, it's a wave.
And the other thing, I just leave everybody with this. I know the light's flashing. Nelson Mandela had a great phrase. And you look at his 27 years in prison, the guy who came out and hugged his jailer and hired him, and he became his guard for the rest of his life. And his example is worth thinking about. But he said that it always seems impossible until it is done. And Muhammad Ali said the same thing. He said, in a different way, he said, impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. And he said, it's a dare. And I think we just have to take the dare. And we will get it done if we do. I have absolute confidence. My fear, I know we're going to get to a low carbon, no net carbon economy. I know we're going to get there. I am not sure we're going to get there in time. That's the challenge, and that's what we have to go make happen.
What's in time? When do we need to get there?
Well, the science is sort of landing on 2045, 2050 to have a net carbon neutrality, which means we'll have a carbon budget. We're not going to be without any carbon entity, but it'll be a carbon budget that the Earth has the ability to cope with, that isn't contributing to more global climate change, that allows us to stabilize. And if we do that, if we have to have a 2030 goal too, which we have in the Paris Agreement, Countries will be meeting next year to come together for the next UN negotiation. And at that meeting, it is already set in Paris, countries have to upgrade their targets. So if we put the pressure on, if we organize now, every country, I'm going to be announcing actually next week, we're going to be putting out a group of us, including Arnold Schwarzenegger, a Republican, and the former governor of New Jersey, a Republican, the former Secretary of Labor. We're going to create this entity that's going to be global, and we're going to try to mobilize citizens all over the world to make sure that next year this is a voting issue in every country that has an election, and that we're going to make a difference.
Wow.
And everybody can be part of that. We need you.
That's great. I had written about 100 more questions. I believe we're running out of time. Do I still have time to have questions from the audience? A couple of questions? Yes, I do. Okay, the clock just started. So we have this incredible thing here, which is a microphone. This is the top. This is where you'll be talking. And you can speak in Portuguese if you prefer, and I'll translate, although I hope you will ask your questions in English if you can. Here you go. Sorry.
Is this the translation thing here?
Yes.
Hello, I'm also Vasco, but not Vasco da Gama, Vasco Medeiros. Recently, I just came from the U.S., representing Portugal in a program about diplomacy and politics in the U.S. And now I'm an alumni from the U.S. State Department and U.S. Embassy in Portugal. And there I had the chance to talk with many people. One person per European country, one young man per European country and woman, and 10 American fellows. So I was among 54 extraordinary people and young men. And most part of them were committed to some of the problems that you said. For example, I had the chance to meet the Brussels leader of the movement in which the students go out to the streets and starts protesting. And the question that I have after the thoughts that I had with them and the thoughts that I had today on the conferences and yesterday as well is, I think, and that might be the message that was sent by these two days of conferences, that was that the recent future is coming, and we want it to be full of green and blue. And what I want to ask you, and I had the chance to talk with Dr. Earle before the conference, and I asked her, and now I want to ask you, is how can we tackle the problems of these problems of the oceans and climate change when you have the problems that are already known, for example, the Brexit situation, the US relationships with China, the Russian situation, the refugee situation, too many situations, too many problems. Among the other problem is the climate change. And when the economy is getting down, how can we try to fix the problems and at the same time recover our economies and our politics and the hope from the citizens?
How do you do it? The first and single most important step is to get a new president of the United States who's committed to doing it. You look at what happened when we were in a few years ago, we were doing these things. We can go back to doing these things. And every person running, at least in the Democratic Party, has a pretty strong program with respect to climate and moving forward. So that's what it's going to take. But how are you going to do that? Let me tell you what happened.
Is it the best time to do it? That's also.
You're damn right it is. Because if we don't get this done, go on a long vacation. I'm serious. You think I'm kidding you, folks? If we don't get this done next few years. In 2016, when the current president was elected, only 54.2% of eligible Americans came out to vote. 9% of President Obama's vote went to Trump. 7% of President Obama's vote didn't even come out. So you start with a 16-point deficit to begin with. When I ran in '04, in the 1 year into a war in Iraq, et cetera, we had a turnout of 60.3%. And I only lost by, one state, 60,000 votes, something, one state. In 2008, when Obama won, it was 63.5% turnout. You get the drift? Here's an even more startling figure. In 2016, when the current president was elected, only 19% of people between 18 and 24 voted. I went to a college recently and I said, hey guys, only 19% of you voted. What the hell is that all about? You think you're serious about these issues? And I said, well, at least in 2018, when we won back the House, it went up to 31%. And they all cheered. I said, are you kidding? You don't get it, do you? That means 69% didn't vote. And so I believe if we make this movement, going back to what I talked about earlier, I know it sounds kind of retro, but it worked. We got people to understand their connection to the choice, and they came out and voted. And that changed the whole direction of our country for the next 20, 30 years. I think we can do that again. I really believe that. I think we can do that again. People are mobilizing. I'll be back in New York next week for the climate strike, the New York UN General Assembly, et cetera. We're going to be organizing. We have huge new honed techniques for communicating, micro-targeting, identifying vote, getting the vote out. And I think just given the choices and what's happened in the last few years, we could have the greatest vote total in the history of our country. And if we do this elsewhere, we will get this done. Have confidence in it. A democracy is a blessing today for your ability to go out and organize. Mm-hmm. Organize. And it takes democracy's hard work, by the way. There's no automatic pilot for democracy. You got to work at it. And it's when you get lazy and don't that trouble happens. And read the book today, How Democracies Die. Some of the things that are happening in a number of countries show you how democracies die. They eliminate the referees. They get people out of the way who could, make the facts known. They use incredible propaganda arms and with the bots that you have on the internet now and so forth, a lot of people are getting bombarded with there is fake news. The problem is it's coming from the people who call everything else fake news. So how do you get back to an equilibrium? You fight for it. Door to door, street for street, town for town, we fight for it. That's how we get back.
American, Connecticut, big fan.
How did they let you ask a question? I'm joking.
Welcome to Portugal.
Thank you. I recently read that most of the plastic in the ocean comes from developing countries because these sustainable solutions that we're all pushing for are not affordable, convenient, or really desired by these people who have more pressing daily issues than being environmentally conscious. I went to the Dominican Republic last year for a couple weeks, building houses in a struggling village, and one of the jobs we had was picking up trash, and there were mountains of it. And unfortunately, many nations are in similar situations. So, Mr. Kerry, my question for you, as someone so largely in the public eye, how can we help? Because if most of the single-use plastic waste is coming from places that aren't in our jurisdiction, what are we able to do?
Well, it's a wonderful question. It's a great question. First of all, you really need, and I'm not here to beat up on the administration, I'm just telling you the truth. If you don't have an administration that makes that kind of initiative a priority, it doesn't happen. It's like the AIDS program that I mentioned earlier. You had to have a president. To his credit, we passed a bill in the Senate, but George Bush, W., picked it up and said, I'm going to do this, and put $30 billion into it, and it became a big part of his administration. It was terrific. I'll give him great credit for it. And it made all the difference in the world. That's what we have to do. President Obama had a program called Power Africa, and we focused very strongly on how we could build out Africa's power grid so that people could get basic electricity. We have 1 billion people in the world who have no electricity. And so what kind of electricity are they going to get? If their leaders believe that coal is the only thing they can do, and that's where some people believe in the world, we're in trouble. China, despite all its dominance of the solar panel market, and frankly, in many, many, many acres, I don't know how many, but they probably lead the world in the deployment of their own panels. They're huge solar users. But they're about to bring online, because of the size of their economy and the demand for energy, 250 megawatts of coal-fired power. That does not make sense. That's dangerous for all of us. So you've got to work at those things. How do you work at them? You bring money to the table that is prepared to help work with the corporations. You can put a price on some of these things so that there's a value in them, and before they get into the waste stream, they go back to the store. You know, bottle deposits or plastic bottle deposits and so forth. You have a price impact on things, and that will affect people's behavior. But you've got to educate people, and you've got to have a program that is willing to reach out and help these countries understand, because many of them don't, the life cycle of that trash, how it moves through the system. And then you can put up blockades, recycling blockade or personal return blockade or other kinds of things that affect behavior. But I think some of those countries are, frankly, ripe for exciting them about this kind of program. But you've got to want to do it. Right. That takes people, and it takes, making it a priority. When I was secretary, I had an edict in the State Department that everybody was to be a climate science ambassador. Everybody had to understand climate change, and they had to think about it in the context of every program they were engaged in, because there's always a way to factor in some kind of impact on the economy and otherwise. So look, all of these things, I don't mean to sound like a broken machine here, repeating it, but leadership is a vital thing. And leadership matters. And there's a book out by Paul Kennedy at Yale University called The Engineers of Victory. And he writes about the key decisions that the leaders made in the context of World War II to make sure that we won. And it's the same thing now. We have to kind of get on a wartime footing. I mean, I would advise whoever the next president is, one of the first things he's got to do is bring in each of the chiefs of the automobile, bring in General Motors, bring in Chevy, bring in, you get them all in the room, you get the scientists in there for 2 hours showing them what's going on, let them ask questions, then you bring the hammer down and say, okay, guys, this isn't good enough. We can't have this rate of transition. We'll help you. We'll help you with tax benefits, with U.S. government softer loans, whatever it takes to retool, to remake, but we've got, and to market, we've got to begin to go electric across the board in our transportation. That's 28% of our emissions, transportation. Another 28% of our emissions is the manufacture of electricity itself. So if we are making sure that we're doing it clean, and I think new technologies will come online. Someone, the next Sergey Brin, the next Larry Page, the next Bill Gates, is going to come up with battery storage. Battery storage that lasts for enough days that you cover the days that there isn't wind or there isn't sun, so that the baseline for businesses is not interrupted. The biggest single game changer we could have in the field of energy production today and climate change would be long-term battery storage. We get that, we're going to make it without any question at all. Maybe hydrogen is going to become a fuel that can be taken to scale and be safe. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities out there. Maybe if we put enough money and effort into it, we'll finally finish the great chase for fusion, which has gone on for 40 years or something. I don't know what it is. I know this. When I go to a college or university, I'll look at kids and I'll say to you, you're going to work in a company that hasn't even been invented yet. And it's going to be really successful. And you know what? It's true. It's true. Look at the rate of turnover in discovery of new companies, new products, new goods. This is going to happen. And with AI, artificial intelligence, it could happen even faster. So that's my confidence. We have always, as humankind, been able to invent ourselves out of something. You go back to the Industrial Revolution, where a lot of bad things came out of it, but nobody knew it back then. The shame is repeating it today when we do know how bad it is. So I think we can get there, as I said, folks, if we start to put these options on the table and move in the right direction. The other thing we ought to do is take tens of billions of dollars from everybody. Everybody ought to contribute to this effort and have a major global consortia with China, Russia, the United States, European countries, France, Germany, Britain, Portugal, whatever, people who have scientists, people who have innovators, and create this incredible incubation effort where we're just pounding away at it. And out of that will come products we can't even predict today. Look at the space race. Did anybody think we were going to get microwave ovens in all our homes because of going to space? Or what about digitalization that came out of the space race? These things will happen as we break the DNA of human beings is to find new things, invent new things, make things happen, and we'll do it.
But if we fail to take care of the natural systems
Absolutely.
that have been developing for 4.5 billion years, that in 4.5 decades we have unraveled, nothing, all of our ingenuity...
Nothing will make up for that.
Yeah, so it's a combination of our ingenuity, but we must respect the natural world as if our lives depend on it, because they kind of do.
That's a really important point. And when I talk about the invention component of this and the innovation component of it, I'm really focused on energy, which is the solution to fundamental climate change. What Sylvia is talking about is a much bigger challenge in many ways, but because it goes to our fundamental economic system and reliance on resources that we chew up at a rate that is not sustainable. That's the other piece. And obviously, there isn't one country in the world today living sustainably, not one. So we have a long way to go on that score.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I'd like to thank you both so much for coming to our little corner by the sea, as we call it. Portugal has been a leader of the oceans for many years. One thing that I enjoy that you said, and which is absolutely true, which is these waters are part of our national identity. And with initiatives like this that make me so proud, and I'm so happy to have come all the way from the United States to be a part of this. Initiatives like this really make me believe that Portugal can be the leaders of the oceans. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very much. Where are you going, out here?
It's initially based